The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the quiet farmland. Rows of ripe corn swayed in the gentle evening breeze, and the scent of fresh soil lingered in the air. A small, modest farmhouse sat nestled between. The fields, its white paint slightly faded but its presence unwavering, a symbol of resilience, of hard work, of a woman who refused to be broken. Inside, Sofia Martinez wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, her sharp eyes flicking toward the window. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now they were whispering a warning. A mother's intuition, some would say. But Sofia knew better. It was something far deeper, something ingrained in her from years of training. Training she had walked away from, a life she had buried, or so she had thought. She glanced at her son, Leo, who sat at the kitchen table, happily doodling in his notebook. At only 10 years old, he had no idea of the world his mother had left behind. No idea that once she had been more than just a farmer, more than just a single mother trying to make ends meet. He only knew the version of her she had carefully built, a woman who loved him fiercely and worked tirelessly to give him a life far removed from danger. But danger, it seemed, had found her again. The sound of tires crunching against gravel outside sent a chill through Sofia's spine. She stilled, her fingers tightening around the dish towel. She did not need to look to know who it was. Over the past few weeks, she had heard the rumors, seen the signs. The cartel had set its sights on her land. And in this part of Mexico, once they wanted something, they took it. She forced a breath, smoothing down her apron as she walked toward the front door. She would not show fear. Fear was weakness. Fear got people killed. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she saw them. 3 men. Their figures cast in shadow under the dying sunlight. They leaned against a dusty black SUV, their postures lazy, but their presence heavy with unspoken threats. The tallest of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "Señora Martinez," he greeted, his voice smooth, almost polite. "A beautiful farm you have here. Peaceful. A shame if anything were to disturb it." Sofia met his gaze, unflinching. "I am not selling." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, but you misunderstand. This is not a negotiation." His smile did not reach his eyes. "The boss is generous. He is willing to let you keep some of the land. A small price to pay for security." Sofia felt the heat rise in her chest, the old fire stirring. Once upon a time, she would have responded differently. Once upon a time, a threat like this would have been met with precise, calculated violence. But she was not that woman anymore. She could not be. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly. "But I take care of my own security." The man studied her, his amusement fading. He took another step closer, lowering his voice. "We will come back, Señora, and when we do, I hope you have reconsidered." With that, he turned, motioning for his men to follow. They climbed back into the SUV, the engine roaring to life. As they drove away, dust kicked up in their wake, swirling around Sofia's feet like an omen. She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. Leo's small voice broke the silence behind her. "Mom? Who were those men?" She turned, forcing a smile as she knelt beside him. "No one you need to worry about, mijo." But as she hugged him close, her mind was already racing. She had left that world behind, buried it deep. But if they thought she was just another helpless farmer, they were about to learn a lesson the hard way. Sofia Martinez was no ordinary woman, and she was not afraid to remind them. Sofia stayed on the porch long after the SUV disappeared down the dirt road. The warmth of the evening breeze did nothing to cool the fire rising in her chest. She had dealt with men like this before, back when she lived a different life, back when she operated in shadows, where threats like these were not just words but deadly promises. But this was different. Now she had something to lose. Leo tugged at her sleeve, his brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you sure, Mama? They looked mad." Sofia smiled, but it was tight, forced. "I am sure, mijo. Go inside and wash up. I will be right there. Leo hesitated, then nodded, his small footsteps fading as he ran back inside. Sophia turned her gaze back toward the road. She knew men like the one who had just stood before her. They did not make empty threats. If they said they would return, they would. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had built this life with her own hands, far from the chaos of her past. When she left the agency, she wanted nothing more than peace, a quiet place where she could raise her son without looking over her shoulder. She had picked this farm because it was small, unnoticed, tucked away in the countryside where trouble should not have followed. But trouble had a way of finding her. Sophia stepped inside, locking the door behind her. She glanced around the cozy home she had built. Handmade furniture, old family photos, a warmth that had taken years to create. She would not let them take it from her. That night, she sat at the kitchen table long after Leo had fallen asleep. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the worn wooden surface. She had thought about calling the police, but she knew better. Corruption ran deep in these parts. The cartel had hands in every pocket, every station. If she went to the authorities, she would be sending them an invitation to take what they wanted even faster. She needed to think. With a deep breath, she stood and walked to the small storage room at the back of the house. She hesitated before reaching for the old wooden chest in the corner. Dust had settled on the surface, the past buried beneath it. With careful hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, the past stared back at her. A tactical knife, a few old documents, with her real name blacked out and a folded piece of cloth, her old CIA field scarf. At the bottom of the chest sat a single locked box. Her fingers brushed over the cool metal. She had not touched these things in years. She had promised herself she never would, but the cartel had just rewritten the rules. She closed the chest and stood up, her pulse steady. There was no avoiding what was coming. They would be back, and when they came, she had to be ready. The next morning, Sophia kept everything normal. She made breakfast, packed Leo's lunch, and walked him to the small schoolhouse down the road. She kissed his forehead before he ran inside, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. Then she turned back toward town. The marketplace bustled with morning shoppers, vendors calling out as they sold fresh produce, spices, and handmade crafts. Sophia moved through the crowd, her senses sharp. She had spent years in places like this, blending in, reading people, picking up on details others would overlook. She spotted a familiar face near a fruit stall. Miguel, an old friend of her late husband. He was a quiet man, a farmer like her, but he had once been something more. They never talked about the past, but they understood each other. "Miguel," she greeted, picking up an orange. He glanced at her, then back at his stall. "Sophia, you look troubled." She rolled the orange between her palms. "The cartel came to my farm last night." Miguel's hands stilled. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "They want your land?" She gave a slow nod. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his graying beard. "It is happening more often now. They take what they want. If you resist..." He shook his head. "You know how this ends." Sophia tightened her grip on the fruit. "Not for me." Miguel studied her for a long moment. "You still have the skills?" Sophia's jaw set. "Enough." Miguel sighed. "You need to leave, Sophia. Take Leo and go. They will not stop." She shook her head. "This is my home. I will not run." Miguel looked around, lowering his voice. "Then you will need help. I know people. Ones who do not fear the cartel." Sophia considered his words. She had always worked alone. Trust was not something she gave easily. But she was not just fighting for herself anymore. She slipped a few pesos onto his stall. "If you hear anything, let me know." Miguel nodded once. As she walked away, she felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. The cartel had people everywhere. They would be watching, waiting. Sophia knew one thing for certain. She could not wait for them to make the next move. She would have to strike first. That night, Sophia sat on the porch again, the cool air wrapping around her as she watched the road. The farm was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant chirping of insects and the soft rustling of leaves. But she knew the silence would not last. She could feel the storm coming. Leo had fallen asleep hours ago, curled up in his bed with his favorite stuffed bear. He had no idea how much the world outside their home had shifted in just 24 hours. She intended to keep it that way. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. The cartel had given her a warning. That meant they would be back soon, probably within days. She needed to prepare, but she had to be careful. If she made the wrong move too soon, she could put Leo in even more danger. Her thoughts drifted to Miguel's words. "You need help?" Sophia had spent years doing things on her own. Even in the CIA, she had operated solo more often than not, taking assignments that required precision, patience, and absolute trust in her own instincts. But this was different. She was not dealing with foreign agents or government operatives. She was facing men who ruled through fear, who had the power to make people disappear overnight. Still, she had an advantage. They did not know who she was. To them, she was just a single mother, a farmer trying to protect her land. They had no idea what she had done before, what she was capable of. She could use that. The next morning, Sophia started working earlier than usual. She made sure everything looked normal, feeding the animals, checking the irrigation system, tending to the crops. But underneath the routine, she was planning. She took mental notes of the farm's weak spots. The back fence needed reinforcing. The old barn doors had a lock that could be broken easily. The main road leading in was too open, too easy for someone to approach unnoticed. By mid-afternoon, she made her way into town again, keeping her movements casual. She stopped by the butcher shop, then the hardware store. She greeted people she knew, exchanged small talk. To anyone watching, she was just a woman running errands. But every move she made had a purpose. At the hardware store, she bought thick chains and a stronger padlock. At the butcher shop, she picked up extra supplies, just enough to make it look like she was stocking up for the week. And at the market, she met Miguel again. He was waiting by the fruit stand, his expression unreadable. "They have been asking about you," he said quietly as she picked up an apple. "Two men. They did not say much, but they wanted to know who you were, if you had family, if you had friends in town." Sophia nodded, keeping her face neutral. "What did you tell them?" Miguel exhaled. "Nothing. But others will not be so careful." She bit into the apple, chewing slowly as she thought. The cartel was already moving. That meant they would come soon. "Can you get a message to someone for me?" she asked. Miguel frowned. "Who?" "A man named Carlos Guerra. He owns a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. Tell him I need to talk." Miguel's eyes darkened with understanding. "You know him?" Sophia nodded. "We worked together a long time ago. He owes me." Miguel hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "I will see what I can do." That night, Sophia reinforced the back fence and secured the barn doors. She made sure Leo stayed inside, keeping him distracted with books and games. He could sense something was wrong, but she reassured him with a smile, telling him everything was fine. She wished she believed her own words. Hours passed, and as the night deepened, the waiting became unbearable. Then, just past midnight, a faint sound reached her ears, the crunch of gravel under tires. Sophia's heartbeat quickened. She moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the front gate. She watched as the headlights cut off. The men were back, and this time, they were not just here to talk.